Hi, I'm Matthew Dillon, Vice President of GreenRoofs Australasia. Firstly, let me congratulate the team at Greenroofs.com, Linda especially, for pulling together this fantastic concept into a reality. It's definitely the way to go for the future, where we can listen to international speakers, learn about new technology, research, and interact as well. I must say that I'm incredibly honoured to be part of such a distinguished list of international speakers and also to represent my country through Greenroofs Australasia. If you hear any strange noises through this introduction talk, it will be because of my little friend here, whose name is Knuckles, and she tends to grunt a lot. So please forgive me if you hear the noise. It's not me, it's her. My presentation will bring together all the capital cities of Australia. I'll try and give you an indication of the key projects here, research, and some insight into the plants that we're using on green roofs and green walls. It's quite exciting in Australia at the moment because our federal government has just brought in a carbon tax, which means more money for biodiversity funds and for greening cities, also for improving the stormwater quality, which is going back into our waterways and our oceans. We already have a very high standard of water-sensitive urban design, and this extra money from the government will ensure that further research can be done and incentives for projects to help them get up. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I'll talk to you at the end of it.
Australia holds a few titles, one being we're the largest island continent. We're also the driest uninhabited continent in the world. We also have the oldest landscape. We have the oldest river system, which actually has no water in it. And we're 32 times the size of Europe, which is about the same size as the USA. As you can see from this map, our rainfall is concentric around an arid core with high intensity rainfall in the tropics to the north and the coastal areas, mainly on the east coast. 20% of the area is desert, which is that white patch, and 91% of the country is vegetated, mainly with hummock grasses and 1 million species, a lot of which have not been identified as yet. There's something like 75,000 flowering plants that aren't found anywhere else in the world. So when we're looking at the interior of our country, this is what it looks like. And we have rains in the far north. Our oldest river system comes alive with water and brings it down into the centre to create an inland sea. The interior of Australia is about 15 metres below sea level. Over the last 10 years, 15 years especially, we've seen impacts of climate change in Australia, which has changed the psyche of the Australian. We're passionate and we want to do something about it. We've seen devastating bushfires raging through the south, wiping out communities, fauna and habitat. As you can see, it just leaves charred sculptural sticks. The interesting thing about Australian plants, trees, is that the germination process for the seeds requires the chemicals from the bushfire smoke, which stays in the atmosphere and then mixed with water becomes part of the germination process. This landscape will bounce back in about 3 months, and it's always interesting to go through the bush after a bushfire and to see how quickly the seeds start to germinate. In the far north, we've experienced, a greater incidence of cyclone activity, which is wiping out the main agricultural belt supplier for Australia, sending food prices up. We envisage that over the next 100 years, Australia will be dependent on its food imports, as we see climate change and the agricultural belt having to move further south where the land is far more expensive and there's far more urbanization. Of course, the coastline is also devastated, wiping out large yachting communities and devastating the community towns. There was a huge flood through Queensland, which ended up down into the centre of Australia, like that slide I previously showed you. Brisbane, our capital city for Queensland, was completely wiped out and submerged. Also, other strange phenomena has been because of the 100-year drought. The red dust from the interior of the country has just been blown. This is Sydney, deposited 1,000 kilometres to the east on the coast. It's not like this all the time, but we're starting to see occurrences like this, which we're not used to, which has really changed the Australians' attitude to climate change and the impacts of. Recently I flew over Los Angeles on my way to Mexico, and you know, it was more or less just a bit of a crystal ball into how some of the Australian cities could be in, you know, another 25 years. We tend to have an urban sprawl in Australia, with 85% of the population living in the capital cities, on the coast, or within 50 kilometres of the coast. And so all of the stormwater runoff, basically, that's coming off the hard surfaces of cities is starting to impact on the quality of the waterways and the oceans around the cities. As you can see, our cities are all situated on beautiful rivers or harbours. Brisbane is Queensland, which is in the north-east, Perth on the far west, Adelaide the southern tip, and Melbourne also on the southeast tip. Sydney, of course, is on the east coast in the centre of the coastline. But you can see from you know, the development in the CBD, freeways, footpaths, buildings, this higher increase in stormwater is actually flushing all of that grime, heavy metals back into the river and harbour systems. And this is something that Australians do enjoy. They love to get out on the beach and sunbake, explore around the rocks, fishing and beach fishing, scuba diving, snorkeling, surfing, and it's also impacting on our wildlife and aquatic systems. So of late we saw a change of government based on the fact that they did nothing about the impacts of climate change and were actually quite sceptical. So they were moved out of power, and the heat is still on for government. This is where the government resides. This is the Federal Parliament building in New South Wales, Canberra. The irony being that most politicians wouldn't know they had a green roof over their heads while they're debating the future and well-being of our country. It's interesting that recently they're trying to save 40% on the water cost for this green roof. So we've actually specified native grasses rather than Kentucky rye. Initially, it was the vision was that you could walk over the roof, but for security reasons, nobody's allowed on it anymore. Not even kangaroos. There used to be herds of kangaroos walking across this roof, but that's all changed. I'll just go through some of the cities. Just starting off with Sydney. City of Sydney are very proactive. They've got a 2030 vision for Sydney. So this is one development in the CBD, apartment towers with Patrick Blanc coming over from Paris to design and install green walls on the facade. By the tallest wall, I mean a 33-metre high north-facing vegetated mat wall using irrigation and nutrient system with no soil. There's 4,528 native Australian plants with from 69 species that's fed by a grey water dripper irrigation system running across at 3-metre intervals. and the irrigation system is automatically activated 6 times a day and can be remotely controlled. There's also a 36,000 litre water tank enabling water to be cycled to reduce the overall consumption. The plants were chosen for their hardiness, and some of them thrive in the high exposure sun, such as the acacia and the poa, placed higher up on the wall. This is a retrofit green roof amenity space quite close to the Trio Apartments in Camperdown. Quite simple Australian hardwood decking, minimal design, buffalo turf and a tuckaroo tree, but quite a beautiful, simple design. This is quite a beautiful civic precinct, which is where the old water aqueducts, and it's in a part of Sydney which is quite historic, with a lot of historical buildings and parks. And the idea here was to integrate the old historic structures with a green roof, and it's actually a well-supported area. City of Sydney were very supportive of this project. There's several garden zones, each with a particular microclimate, and separate different levels for the rooftop. It's intensive green roof, and the eastern rooftop garden comprises of a lawn bordered by evergreen shrubs to give some privacy to the residents. There's also a sunken garden, and as you can see in the bottom corner, there's a lone angophora, and they've also used mallee eucalyptus and green shrub planting along the southern boundary. Sustainability was a big driver on this project, and also for a recreational outdoor space. Australia is the most urbanised country in the world, with our population living in the capital cities. And Sydney, the largest city with about 5 million people, ranks as one of the most livable cities in the world and has one of the lowest city population densities, with the highest standard of living in Australia and possibly the world. This image is the Wharf 11 apartments. Wharf 11 is a semi-intensive example built in 1989, and it was done to satisfy protest against the development so close to the Botanical Gardens and Sydney Harbour. It's a testament to what a developer can do to use green roofs as a satisfactory camouflage. Located in the most historic section of Australia near Sydney Cove, this 2001 redevelopment, incorporating an historic building by colonial architect Sir Francis Greenway, was completed by the New South Wales Government architect Chris Johnson, who happens to be speaking at our conference. If you come along, you'll hear him. And also the architectural practice of Darryl Jackson, Robin Dyke, Robert Tanner. The landscape architects were Klaus and Associates, and they designed the roof as an elevated podium to provide a thematic and visual connection with the adjacent Royal Botanical Gardens. This example is an extension of the camouflage technique used by developers who also did nearby Wharf 11, which I previously spoke about. It's Embarkation Park. It's a semi-intensive green roof, approximately 1,800 square metres. It's on a car park which was initially included to blend the building with the foreshore of Sydney Harbour, along with other developments nearby. This is the M Central apartment block, which has received a lot of media attention in Sydney. It's quite close to the CBD. The project drivers for this were visual amenity, increased usable open space, and to improve the market value. The design was done by 360 degrees, and the green roof classification is intensive, but the depth is 300 generally, and localised for 1,000 millimetres, that's 1 metre, for trees. The plants are mainly just low water use species, including native grasses, shrubs and trees. Some of the trees, the mature trees that were imported into the rooftop are Capeniopsis, Plumeria, and Dracaena Draca. So, it's basically a collaboration of decking pathways through expansive native grasslands, and they lead into recreational opportunities, secret lawns, soft play areas for children, and formal and informal gathering spaces with barbecue facilities, and sculptural arbour cloaked by flowering climbers. It's quite a beautiful and popular rooftop green space, and they did a survey. They found that 40% of inhabitants in the apartment block were actually using this on a regular basis. The other bonus to the End Central is, and being a dog lover, you can have dogs in these apartments, and a lot of people take their dogs up there and walk them and play. It's 2,500 square metres, so plenty of room to run around and throw a ball. This is an industrial area in Sydney. Just threw this in just because I think it's an aesthetic treatment of ugly industrial fencing with some beautiful water-tolerant, salt-tolerant plants that actually beautify what normally would be an ugly cyclone fence. Okay, enough of Sydney and New South Wales, and we're moving south to South Australia, the capital being Adelaide. Two major projects in Adelaide that stand out are the Christie Walk and also the Adelaide Zoo. This is the Adelaide Zoo Envirodome. It's an extensive classification. Mainly the materials they used were a waterproof membrane, drainage cell, hydrocell, concrete wash river sand, and hydrocell flakes to hold moisture, and composted pine bark. There's an inline drip system, and they used a lot of the recycled building materials from the salt as a mulch layer. Plant species are Australian native grasses. The plantings, covering about 825 square metres, needed to function well in cold winters with frost and extreme heat in the summer, and needed relatively low maintenance. This redevelopment of Adelaide Zoo was finished in 2010, and the driver was an integration with landscape and creating a ground-to-roof connection. The plants on this fabulous entry green wall were grown with their individual mixed species modules, grown off-site, so that when the wall went in, it was 100% plant coverage, and the modules were delivered by truck and installed. The pattern of the plants alludes to the proximity of the first creek. The plants used in this wall were Adelaide plain species, such as the saltbush, Dianella and Lomandra. This is another angle of the zoo entrance and the green wall. There's a total of 160,000 litres of water stored below the forecourts, and this external living wall of approximately 90 square metres is located adjacent to the entrance precinct and links the ground plane to the roof above to maximise the potential habitat opportunities. This is above the green wall which connects. This is the green roof, and when these native grasses do grow, there'll be a multitude of habitat opportunities for birds and insects, lizards, etc. Okay, I can't spend too much time. It's a big country, lots of projects. But moving east, we go to Victoria, and the capital of Victoria is Melbourne. Melbourne City Council are very progressive and doing a lot of exciting projects. In 2008, they set up what's known as Canopy, which is a forum meeting once a month, and it's discussion-based. It's really modelled on the Sheffield Nigel Dunnett facility, where there's a collaboration between the University of Melbourne, City Council, professionals, developers, and basically anyone who wants to come along and discuss green roofs. It's been a great plus and seen a lot of projects. I think this is an absolutely stunning example of integration between architecture and a sensitive landscape. The green roof is intensive at a depth of around 300 millimeters. The plants used were the indigenous coastal species, like large tussock grass and lamandra, spiny-headed matbush. And it was a green roof that was the optimal solution to create a high-performance environmental building and to introduce a new building into a sensitive landscape and wetland environment in a way which contribute to the local ecology. I think it's just a beautiful solution. The Venny in Melbourne City is a project you could go on for hours about because it's mainly done as a research facility, and this is really cutting edge. It's an extensive green roof, and the drivers for this were sustainability, human comfort, because it's a communal backyard play space for children between 5 and 12, and also for research trial for the public domain. The plants used were native and exotic species. I'm quite sure that the foundation for the building were converted containers, and the growing media was a mineral-based, organic-based substrates with a mineral supplementary irrigation, and only plants with a high capacity to tolerate water deficit conditions were selected. The CH2 building is an apartment block, 10 stories, and it was commissioned by the City of Melbourne Council for 540 of the Melbourne City staff. Underneath there's car spaces and shops. It's situated right in the heart of Melbourne. The plants they used were native and exotic species, and it was Australia's first 6 Green Star design certified building. The Green Star system in Australia is a little dubious. You can get a Green Star for putting in a bike rack. However, green roofs and green walls have to provide a habitat that didn't exist before. This building also has climbing plants going up a trellis system, which I'll just show you in a second on the next slide here. As you can see, there's a stainless steel mesh trellis system on the verandas. Initially, the wisteria and the Rosa Banksia got a sort of a mildew mold and were replaced with some Canidia and Pandaria, and I think also some Trachelius sternum, which seem to be doing quite well. Now, this is a good example of a bit of Australian ingenuity. The aim here was to make Melbourne more sustainable. So the Growing Up project was started, and it was launched in March 2009, offering CBD building owners an opportunity to win a free green roof, designed and retrofitted particularly for their building. So applicants put in their designs, and they were shortlisted. Architects and landscape designers were invited to see their design come to life and win $10,000 by submitting the most sustainable and innovative green roof. This is 131 Queen Street, which won the award, and it became the first green roof in the world to be fully funded by a competition. Well done, Melbourne. Just a little green wall in Melbourne to break up a rather stark white atmosphere, add a little bit of psychological well-being for retired workers. It's been quite healthy, this green wall. It's been in for about 6 years now. One of the good things that came out of the drought for Victoria was the Wonthaggi desalination plant, previously an area that had been neglected and ravaged through mining, farming, and mismaintenance on the sand dune system. What was proposed was a desalination plant, which was restoration, which would include 4,000 new plants and 15,000 trees to reinstate the coastal dune system and create wetlands and coastal woodlands and new habitat for local fauna. Of course, again, the old camouflage routine came up. A lot of the locals in the area, you can see them, not many there, but activists got together and said that it would be a blight on the landscape. So they came up with a green roof concept, and it got passed. Don't mean to seem cynical, but it then became a new coastal park, and the plant, even though it comprised of 29 buildings, they would just take up 38 of the total 263 hectare site. And what they did was they set it at a reduced ground level, enabling it to be integrated into the landscape and reducing the amount of energy needed to lift seawater to the plant. Basically, the whole project was based on the concept of a green line running through the site, and feature of it being the innovative living roof, which was and still is to become the biggest green roof in the southern hemisphere, being 40,000 square meters from memory. Yeah, completely covered with living indigenous vegetation, of course, and that would also provide acoustic protection and help with corrosion resistance and thermal biomass and insulation, thermal control, and also reduce the maintenance costs. We're yet to see it's well under construction, and I think it's practically finished. I know the green roof is finished, but I don't have any photos of it, unfortunately. I even know Australia and New Zealand are fiercely competitive, especially at rugby union. They have a lot in common. They were both settled by the British around 200 years ago, and we're still reasonably young societies. And Australia and New Zealand have the advantage of an extensive body of worldwide research and project precedents to draw upon, which for a new industry like the green roof industry is an advantage. There's also the challenges of relatively small population and economic basis, in addition to specific climatic extremes that require some different approaches and solutions to those suitable for the Northern Hemisphere. And I think Australians and New Zealanders are quite renowned for their ingenuity. This is showing through with green roof and green wall design. Indeed, we need to look firstly within our own lands and histories to develop ideas and directions that have the most relevance for us. Le Parc in Auckland, the capital of New Zealand, won an award from the Institute of Landscape Architects, and it's just one of those spaces that continues to delight people year-round. It's a place of serenity and relief from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It's 3,500 square meters of private park, and it's an elevated landscape with a depth of between 100 and 400 millimeters. Some of the plants used were citrus under clipstar jasmine, providing an endless supply of limes and scent. The flowering cherry trees, Prunus awani, which is a New Zealand species, camellia hedge, wisteria, and many other garden plants offer a seasonal change, dappled shade, and beautiful floral displays and scents. It was built about 6 years ago and is still growing extremely well. This is the first green wall in New Zealand, done by Habitats, Graham Cleary, and still continues to look great today. This is New Zealand's Mars salon. Sorry, my memory's starting to lose it here. It's a hairdressing salon, and it's a double-sided freestanding green wall designed by the Green Wall Company in Australia, and it's also, well, I think it was a bit of a dual effort there with Natural Habitats and Green Wall Company, Mark Paul, and there's New Zealand-made components, and it set a new standard for green wall design and construction in New Zealand. It's a great little project. Leaving New Zealand, I'll just say that we're going to kick your ass in the World Cup. Australia is going to win the World Cup, and that's for every other country. I just want that on record. Recently I was in China, in Shanghai, and I've got to say that you know, the place is on steroids. They're putting vegetation on everything, up walls, on roofs, which is fantastic. But anything done that quickly doesn't always survive. A lot of monoculture, soil specifications, but also lots of successes. I'm not being cynical, but in the purest sense of the green roof, there's a lot of paving, and but there's also a lot of green, which is a positive. So, China are doing amazing things. Being part of well, Australasia, we keep an eye on Singapore and Malaysia, who are doing extraordinary projects, and also China. This is, I think, quite a sensitive, intensive, extensive green roof on a school in Shanghai, where there's minimal space. Starting to see the value of incorporating green space on the rooftops. Also, a lot of food production going on in China on rooftops, actually growing rice. Had some fantastic rice wine that was grown on a rooftop. Also, a multitude of products coming out of China. This was a green wall system. I can only describe as a series of pouches, about 300, about 200 depth with soil, irrigation lines, all clad onto a studs grid system behind two species of plants. I think one's an ivy. Not sure how I'm going for time, but I'm just going to whip through some Australian research. This is a project our company did for a City of Sydney Council. It was supposed to be for a template retrofit onto a pretty bog average apartment block near the city. 800 square meters, connected the 5 levels, recycled all the stormwater and grey water and black water on the level 1 areas, and used photovoltaic water pumps to irrigate. We also incorporated the photovoltaic cells to do a bit of a test on evapotranspiration cooling for photovoltaics, and incorporated market gardening with a lower level on level 3 for a childcare facility due to security and childcare centre. Also fruit trees, citrus, and amenity space for any functions that people in the building have. It was still on the drawing boards, but hey, we've got hope. Back to Melbourne research, and the project driver on this one was sustainability, visual amenity, human comfort, and indeed ongoing research opportunities. Within the building's innovative and integrated energy saving features of particular interest are the green roofs and the roles they play in a holistic approach to sustainability. Significant design concept was to compensate for the vegetation that would have naturally existed on the site, which is achieved with horizontal and vertical plantings, the roof landscape and the northern green facade of the building. In addition, there's internal plantings in the office areas and on the summer and winter terraces at the western end. This is the Burnley campus, Melbourne University, and it's a, I think, really cute little project. Water retention, succulents, on a 45-degree pitch roof. No easy task, but very successful. Of course, researchers have got an eye on, you know, this is a new industry for nurseries and supplying plants also to overseas, and because of the resilience of Australian plants, there's a lot of research into their water tolerance and or their drought tolerance, actually, and also salt tolerance. Probably not up to scratch with hydrotech in America, but we're also doing research into modular and especially shallow growing media profiles to, you know, between 50 and 80 millimeters. Due to the increasing blight of bushfires, there is also a place for green roofs to more or less protect the buildings as bushfires move through communities, and the soil profile being watered down would act as a wet blanket over the building and protect it. I've had a few arguments with researchers on carbon sequestration and saying that green roofs can store carbon much similar to timber structures store carbon, and should be included as some sort of carbon subsidy. This particular project by Stratum was comparing carbon sequestration and energy saving benefits of Australian street trees for local councils. And there's two projects, the second one directly to quantify the benefits of trees upon energy use for buildings, air conditioning and their water use. This has also been done at Melbourne University. As if I haven't said it enough, the drought tolerance plants in Australia, another example of using it on a crushed tile. These plants require hardly any water at all. This research project mainly for demountable classrooms for schools and also for Aboriginal housing, using just a brown roof, crushed rubble and whatever plants grow due to bird droppings, etc. So be it. Just moving on to Australian vegetation. Initially we relied on plant documentation from Europe, North America and Asia, as there was little knowledge about specifying green roof plants in Australia and New Zealand. But we know now that rooftops are generally exposed to climatic extremes and may experience direct and reflected sun in summer, heavy rain or snow in winter and turbulent winds all year round. So the plants need to be selected so they match the relatively harsh environment conditions of the built environment. This has led us into researching particular plants, because there is no one plant to specify for Australian rooftops due to the variation in climate. Another driving influence in Australia is because it's a young industry, the cost of green roofs is still quite high, averaging for an extensive to be around $500 and for a green wall around $2,500 a square metre. So it's not surprising that in Australia we're moving towards a shallow substrate and using indigenous plants that have a shallow root system and require little maintenance. We also realised to create green pockets and green corridors through our urban developments to improve biodiversity and habitat, but we do need to specify indigenous plants, usually chosen from the surrounding area. In Australia, I think we're still fighting the client when it comes to specifying plants who want lush, beautiful, green, vegetated roof gardens, and we've always pushed for the green roofs to be low maintenance, using hardly any water and not requiring irrigation, not much nutrient and also little maintenance. So we're choosing plant communities that actually work together rather than just a monoculture or a selection of equatorial species. Some of those species for an extensive green roof would be, I'll just give you the common name because it's simpler, are some of the grasses and tussocks, blue tussock grass, kangaroo grass, Australian salt grass, hairy spinifex. Some of the succulent ground creepers that are popular are the cacalia, the bower spinach, the ruby saltbush. Some of the ground creepers, small fanflower, the June fanflower, the creeping biviala, and some of the climbers that have done really well are the coast twin leaf and the nitra bush. On the intensive green roofs, if you're going for the woody prostate perennials, prostate kunzia, the moontrees, the prickle tree horizontalis, and the round tea tree, or the woolly grevillea. For the small low shrubs and herbs, the Austral's stalkbill, white correa, native fuchsia, spreading correa, the cushion bush, the dwarf she oak, the sea breeze saltbush, and prickly mosses. Also on the intensive green roofs you can use tufted perennials like black anther, flax lily, the mat rush, and the long purple flag. We've noticed that Sydney, where I'm based, is the coastal conditions are fairly similar to what we're trying to achieve on a high-rise building. With shallow soils, it's a windswept environment. It's also a natural environment, so you have to import everything into that environment, including microorganisms. There's salty winds from the prevailing winds off the ocean, high levels of light and glare, and some days cold, and we have other days that are extremely hot, up around 35 degrees. There's high evaporation, and so we find specifying plant communities from the Hawkesbury region, which is a little bit further north of Sydney. It actually has more species than the United Kingdom put together. It's a couple of 100 square kilometres. So yeah, we're learning our lessons from our immediate environment and being very plant specific and site specific. For a high-rise green roof around 30 stories, we find that the low hardy shallow root system ground covers that we find in the surrounding coastal regions and Hawkesbury regions to be ideal for that situation. So look, that brings me to the end. I've tried to incorporate pretty much all of Australia, show you some projects that we're proud of, some research, give you a bit of an insight into what's driving the green roof industry in Australia, even though it is quite young. And you know, I appreciate you listening. This is one last plug for firstly the Wallabies and the World Cup, and secondly for our Greening Cities Conference. If you're in the area or if you're in Australia listening, come along to Sydney. There'll be training workshops, 101 Green Roof. Also, we'll have about 20 speakers over 2 days providing lunch. There'll be social events, and there will be a green roof and green wall tour around Sydney. So it'll be a lot of fun. Come along and watch this page. Hopefully you might see you next year. Until then, keep planting.
Hi, well I guess that's a wrap. And I'd like to just thank Linda and the team at GreenRoofs.com for pulling together this virtual summit. It's been very exciting for me to participate. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you know a lot more about Australia and what we're doing here and what we're achieving. It's definitely an exciting time for us in Australia. It's been a slow growth industry, but now that we have the government subsidising greening cities, it's definitely looking like it's about to explode. So as I also said in the presentation, we're having a national conference in Sydney in November. We're having 4 keynote speakers: Patrick Blanc from Paris, Bruce Hemstock from Vancouver, Dusty Gedge from the UK, and also Charlie Sinclair from Boston. Also with them will be leading authorities in New Zealand and Australia, speaking on projects, research and latest technology available here at home. If you're in the area or if you're in Australia listening to me now, please come along or go to our website and find out all the details. That's www.greenroofsaustralasia.com.au. I really enjoyed being here. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next year for a bigger and better virtual summit. Thank you.